Hello there everyone, I hope you're doing well and welcome to the reading of chapter 5 of Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy. Chapter 5 is charity, and I've just realised that I've not got the normal lights on, so let me turn those on for a moment, bear with me. Sorry about that. First bit of production technical issues that we've had at the live reads, but yes, chapter 5 of Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy is on charity, and so I'll be interested to see. I don't think he's talking about the charity that we think of, giving to charity or charity shops, charities in the sense, but yeah, who knows? I don't know what he means, but we'll find out shortly. So let's get right into it. Chapter 5, Charity. Quote, "He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love." Oh, I think that's meant to be said. "He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love." And that's 1 John 4. Hello there, Bruce. Good evening to you. I hope you're well this evening, ready for charity. Quote, "By love may he be gotten and holden, but by thought never." And that's from The Cloud of Unknowing. Another quote, "Whosoever studies to reach contemplation, i.e. unitive knowledge, should begin by searchingly inquiring of himself how much he loves, for love is the motive power of the mind, machina mentis, which draws it out of the world and raises it on high." End quote. And that's from St. Gregory the Great. Quote, "The astrolabe of the mysteries of God is love." And that one's from Jalaluddin Rumi. And there we go. Quote from Shakespeare here. "Heavens deal so still, let the superfluous and lust-dieted man that slaves your ordinance, that will not see, because he doth not feel your power quickly." That's Shakespeare. And then the last quote here in this section is, "Love is infallible, it has no errors, for all errors are the want of love." And that one's from William Law. "We can only love what we know, and we can never know completely what we do not love. Love is a mode of knowledge, and when the love is sufficiently disinterested and sufficiently intense, the knowledge becomes unitive knowledge, and so takes on the quality of infallibility. Where there is no disinterested love, or more briefly, no charity, there is only biased self-love, and consequently only a partial and distorted knowledge both of the self and of the world of things, lives, mind, and spirit outside the self. The lust-dieted man slaves the ordinances of heaven, that is to say, he subordinates the laws of nature and the spirit to his own cravings." Hello there, Google. I'm doing very well, thank you. It's lovely to see you too. I hope you're doing well also. "The result is that he does not feel, and therefore makes himself incapable of knowledge. His ignorance is ultimately voluntary. If he cannot see, it is because he will not see. Such voluntary ignorance inevitably has its negative reward. Nemesis follows hubris, sometimes in a spectacular way, as when the self-blinded man, Macbeth, Othello, Lear, falls into the trap which his own ambition or possessiveness or petulant vanity has prepared for him, sometimes in a less obvious way, as in the cases where power, prosperity, and reputation endure to the end, but at the cost of an ever-increasing imperviousness to grace and enlightenment, an ever-completer inability to escape, now or hereafter, from the stifling prison of selfness and separateness. How profound can be the spiritual ignorance by which such enslavers of heaven's ordinances are punished is indicated by the behaviour of Cardinal Richelieu on his deathbed. The priest who attended him urged the great man to prepare his soul for its coming ordeal by forgiving all his enemies. "I have never had any enemies," the cardinal replied, with the calm sincerity of an ignorance which long years of intrigue and avarice and ambition had rendered as absolute, and had been his political power, save only those of the state. Like Napoleon, but in a different way, he was feeling heaven's power, because he had refused to feel charity, and therefore refused to know the whole truth about his own soul or anything else. Quote, "Here on earth the love of God is better than the knowledge of God, while it is better to know inferior things than to love them. By knowing them we raise them in a way to our intelligence, whereas by loving them we stoop towards them and may become subservient to them, as the miser to his gold." And that's a quote from St. Thomas Aquinas, which is paraphrased. Back to Huxley. This remark seems at first sight to be incompatible with what precedes it, but in reality St. Thomas is merely distinguishing between the various forms of love and knowledge. It is better to know God than just to know about God. Without love, through the reading of a treatise on theology, gold, on the other hand, should never be known with the miser's love, or rather concupiscence, but either abstractly as the scientific investigator knows it, or else with the disinterested love-knowledge of the artist in metal, or of the spectator, who knows the goldsmith's work not for its cash value, not for the sake of possessing it, but just because it is beautiful. And the same applies to all created things, lives and minds. It is bad to know them with self-centered attachment and cupidity. It is somewhat better to know them with scientific dispassion. It is best to supplement abstract knowledge without cupidity with true disinterested love-knowledge, having the quality of aesthetic delight or of charity or of both combined. Quote, "We make an idol of truth itself, for truth apart from charity is not God, but his image and idol, which we must neither love nor worship." End quote. And that's from Pascal. Back to Huxley. By a kind of philological accident, which is probably no accident at all, but one of the more subtle expressions of man's deep-seated will to ignorance and spiritual darkness, the word... I'm glad you're feeling Aquinas, Google. The word charity has come in modern English to be synonymous with almsgiving, and is almost never used in its original sense as signifying the highest and the most divine form of love. Owing to this impoverishment of our, at the best of times, very inadequate vocabulary of psychological and spiritual terms, the word love has had to assume an added burden. God is love, we repeat glibly, and that we must love our neighbours as ourselves. But love, unfortunately, stands for everything from what happens when, on the screen, two close-ups rapturously collide, to what happens when a John Woolman or a Peter Claver feels a concern about Negro slaves, because they are temples of the Holy Spirit. From what happens when crowds shout and sing and wave flags in Sport Palace or the Red Square, to what happens when a solitary contemplative becomes absorbed in the prayer of simple regard. Ambiguity in vocabulary leads to confusion of thought, and in this matter of love, confusion of thought admirably serves the purpose of an unregenerate and divided human nature that is determined to make the best of both worlds. To say that it is serving God, while in fact it is serving Mammon, Mars, or Priapus. Systematically, or in brief aphorism and parable, the masters of the spiritual life have described the nature of true charity and have distinguished it from the other, lower forms of love. Let us consider its principal characteristics in order. First, charity is disinterested, seeking no reward, nor allowing itself to be diminished by any return of evil for its good. God is to be loved for himself, not for his gifts, and persons and things are to be loved for God's sake, because they are temples of the Holy Ghost. Moreover, since charity is disinterested, it must of necessity be universal. Good night, reading time. You can always catch up another day when you have more time, but good night for now. You're very welcome. We have another quote. Quote, "Love seeks no cause beyond itself and no fruit. It is its own fruit, its own enjoyment. I love because I love. I love in order that I may love. Of all the motions and affections of the soul, love is the only one by means of which the creature, though not on equal terms, is able to treat with the Creator and to give back something resembling what has been given to it. When God loves, he only desires to be loved, knowing that love will render all those who love him happy." End quote. And that one's from St. Bernard. We have another load of quotes here. So this next one is from William Law. "For as love has no buy-ins, wills nothing but its own increase, so everything is as oil to its flame. It must have that which it wills and cannot be disappointed, because everything, including unkindness on the part of those loved, naturally helps it to live in its own way and to bring forth its own work." End quote. That's William Law. Another quote. "Those who speak ill of me are really my good friends. When, being slandered, I cherish neither enmity nor preference, there grows within me the power of love and humility, which is born of the unborn." And that's from Kang Chia Tashi, who I don't know who that is. Another quote. "Some people want to see God with their eyes as they see a cow, and to love him as they love their cow, for the milk and cheese and profit it brings them. This is how it is with people who love God for the sake of outward wealth or inward comfort. They do not rightly love God when they love him for their own advantage. Indeed, I tell you the truth, any object you have in your mind, however good, will be a barrier between you and the inmost truth." Meister Eckhart. Another quote. "A beggar, Lord, I ask of thee, more than 1,000 kings could ask. Each one wants something which he asks of thee. I come to ask thee to give me thyself." And that's a quote from Ansari of Herat. Quote, "I will have nothing to do with a love which would be for God or in God. This is a love which pure love cannot abide, for pure love is God himself." And that's a quote from St. Catherine of Genoa. Another quote. "As a mother, even at the risk of her own life, protects her son, her only son, so let there be goodwill without measure between all beings. Let goodwill without measure prevail in the whole world, above, below, around, unstinted, unmixed, with any feeling of differing or opposing interests. If a man remains steadfastly in this state of mind all the time he is awake, then is come to pass the saying, 'Even in this world, holiness has been found.'" End quote. And that's from the Metta Sutta. Quote. "Learn to look with an equal eye upon all beings, seeing the one self in all." And that's from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which I've done a few videos about on the channel if you're interested in Srimad Bhagavatam. Now back to Huxley for a brief moment. The second distinguishing mark of charity is that, unlike the lower forms of love, it is not an emotion. It begins as an act of the will and is consummated as a purely spiritual awareness, a unitive love knowledge of the essence of its object. And here we have 3 more quotes. First one from St. Teresa. Quote, "Let everyone understand that real love of God does not consist in tear-shedding, nor in that sweetness and tenderness for which usually we long, just because they console us, but in serving God in justice, fortitude of soul, and humility." End quote. Another quote. "The worth of love does not consist in high feelings, but in detachment, in patience under all trials for the sake of God whom we love." And that's from St. John of the Cross. And this final quote from William Law. By love I do not mean any natural tenderness, which is more or less in people according to their constitution, but I mean a larger principle of the soul, founded in reason and piety, which makes us tender, kind, and gentle to all our fellow creatures, as creatures of God, and for his sake. Now back to Huxley. The nature of charity, or the love knowledge of God, is defined by Shankara, the great Vedantist saint and philosopher of the 9th century, in the 32nd couplet of his Viveka Chudamani. And this is that quote from the Viveka Chudamani. Among the instruments of emancipation, the supreme is devotion, contemplation of the true form of the real self. The Atman, which is identical with Brahman, is said to be devotion. Back to Huxley. In other words, the highest form of love of God is an immediate spiritual intuition by which knower, known, and knowledge are made one. The means to and earlier stages of the supreme love knowledge of spirit by spirit are described by Shankara in the preceding verses of his philosophical poem, and consist in acts of a will directed towards the denial of selfness in thought, feeling, and action, towards desirelessness and non-attachment, or, to use the corresponding Christian term, holy indifference, towards a cheerful acceptance of affliction, without self-pity and without thought of returning evil for evil, and finally towards unsleeping and one-pointed mindfulness of the Godhead, who is at once transcendent and, because transcendent, immanent in every soul. And this is this last part here, the holy indifference, reminds me of the book of Job. I don't know if you've ever read the book of Job, but it's a wonderful book from the Old Testament where Job has a terrible time in his life, and he's a very devoted Jew to God, to Yahweh, and everyone says, oh, you know, why don't you just blaspheme, why don't you curse God? And he never does. He remains in holy indifference throughout all of his trials. We have Google says, that's very interesting now, as you know, that Priapus, as in Greek divinity, he as a god of both animal and vegetable fertility, whose original Asianly traditions, in fact. I like it too, Google. I do so enjoy the Perennial Philosophy, although it's very heavy going, but that's why I'm doing one chapter at a time. Can you imagine trying to work through 3 chapters of the Perennial Philosophy? Your brain would be frazzled. After 2.5 chapters, you'd need to go to sleep. So I think I've made the right choice of doing it one chapter at a time. Here we have quite a long quote from St. John of the Cross. It is plain that no distinct object whatever that pleases the will can be God, and for that reason, if the will is to be united with him, it must empty itself, cast away every disorderly affection of the desire, every satisfaction it may distinctly have, high and low, temporal and spiritual, so that, purified and cleansed from all unruly satisfactions, joys, and desires, it may be wholly occupied with all its affections in loving God. For if the will can in any way comprehend God and be united with him, it cannot be through any capacity of the desire, but only by love. And as all the delight, sweetness, and joy of which the will is sensible is not love, it follows that none of these pleasing impressions can be the adequate means of uniting the will to God. These adequate means consist in an act of the will, and because an act of the will is quite distinct from feeling, it is by an act that the will is united with God and rests in him. That act is love. This union is never wrought by feeling or exertion of the desire, for these remain in the soul as aims and ends. It is only as motives of love that feelings can be of service, if the will is bent on going onwards and for nothing else. He, then, is very unwise who, when sweetness and spiritual delight fail him, think for that reason that God has abandoned him, and when he finds them again rejoices and is glad, thinking that he has in that way come to possess God. More unwise still is he who goes about seeking for sweetness in God, rejoices in it, and dwells upon it. For in so doing he is not seeking after God with the will grounded in the emptiness of faith and charity, but only in spiritual sweetness and delight, which is a created thing, following herein in his own will and fond pleasure. It is impossible for the will to attain to the sweetness and bliss of the divine union otherwise than in detachment, in refusing to the desire every pleasure in the things of heaven and earth. End quote. And that's St. John of the Cross. When I read that, Google, let me know what you meant by that God. It reminds me of the end of Brave New World. I don't know if you was with us and shared it. I'm sure you were, but when John Savage is speaking with Mustafa Mond and talking about God. So if you could elaborate on what you mean by that God. And one more quote from Meister Eckhart. Love, the sensible love of the emotions, does not unify. True, it unites in act, but it does not unite in essence. Back to Huxley. Huxley says, the reason why sensible love, even of the highest object, cannot unite the soul to its divine ground in spiritual essence is that, like all other emotions of the heart, sensible love intensifies that selfness which is the final obstacle in the way of such union. The damned are in eternal movement without any mixture of rest. We mortals who are yet in this pilgrimage have now movement, now rest. Only God has repose without movement. Consequently, it is only if we abide in the peace of God that passes all understanding that we can abide in the knowledge and love of God. And to the peace that passes understanding we have to go by way of the humble and very ordinary peace which can be understood by everybody. Peace between nations and within them, for wars and violent revolutions have the effect of more or less totally eclipsing God for the majority of those involved in them. Peace between individuals and within the individual soul, for persons, quarrels and private fears, loves, hates, ambitions and distractions are, in their petty way, no less fatal to the development of the spiritual life than are the greater calamities. We have to will the peace that it is within our power to get for ourselves and others, in order that we may be fit to receive that other peace, which is a fruit of the Spirit and the condition, as St. Paul implied, of the unitive knowledge, love of God. And what follows is a quote from the Surangama Sutra. Quote, it is by means of tranquility of mind that you are able to transmute this false mind of death and rebirth into the clear, intuitive mind and, by doing so, to realize the primal and enlightening essence of mind. You should make this your starting point for spiritual practices. Having harmonized your starting point with your goal, you will be able, by right practice, to attain your true end of perfect enlightenment. If you wish to tranquilize your mind and restore its original purity, you must proceed as you would do if you were purifying a jar of muddy water. You first let it stand until the sediment settles at the bottom, when the water will become clear, which corresponds with the state of the mind before it was troubled by defiling passions. Then you carefully strain off the pure water. When the mind becomes tranquilized and concentrated into perfect unity, then all things will be seen, not in their separateness, but in their unity, wherein there is no place for the passions to enter, and which is in full conformity with the mysterious and indescribable purity of nirvana. And that was, like I say, from the Surangama Sutra. Another quote from Meister Eckhart. The identity out of the one into the one and with the one is the source and fountainhead and breaking forth of glowing love. Goodness me, I have to read that one again because that's pretty intense. The identity out of the one into the one and with the one is the source and fountainhead and breaking forth of glowing love. Okay? Back to Huxley. Spiritual progress, as we have had on occasion to discover in several other contexts, is always spiral and reciprocal. Peace from distractions and emotional agitations is the way to charity, and charity, or unitive love knowledge, is the way to the higher peace of God. And the same is true of humility, which is the third characteristic mark of charity. Humility is a necessary condition of the highest form of love, and the highest form of love makes possible the consummation of humility in a total self-naughting. Another quote: would you become a pilgrim on the road of love? The first condition is that you make yourself humble as dust and ashes. And that's a quote from Ansari of Herat. Another quote from Fenelon: I love but one word to say to you concerning love for your neighbour, namely that nothing save humility can mould you to it. Nothing but the consciousness of your own weakness can make you indulgent and pitiful to that of others. You will answer, I quite understand that humility should produce forbearance towards others, but how am I first to acquire humility? Two things combined will bring that about. You must never separate them. The first is contemplation of the deep gulf whence God's all-powerful hands has drawn you out, and over which he ever holds you, so to say, suspended. The second is the presence of that all-penetrating God. It is only in beholding and loving God that we can learn forgetfulness of self, measure duly the nothingness which has dazzled us, and accustom ourselves thankfully to decrease beneath that great majesty which absorbs all things. Love God and you will be humble. Love God and you will throw off the love of self. Love God and you will love all that he gives you to love for love of him. End quote. That's Fenelon. Okay, Google, I understand. Yeah, it's he doesn't do half measures, and he definitely, he has a respect and an adoration for the language. So I agree with what you're saying. Attention to detail, I think that's the best term for it. Back to Huxley briefly. Feelings, as we have seen, may be of service as motives of charity, but charity as charity has its beginning in the will to peace and humility in oneself, will to patience and kindness towards one's fellow creatures, will to that disinterested love of God which asks nothing and refuses nothing. But the will can be strengthened by exercise and confirmed by perseverance. This is very clearly brought out in the following record, delightful for its Boswellian vividness, of a conversation between the young Bishop of Bely and his beloved friend and master, Francois de Sales. And this quote comes from Jean-Pierre Camus. I once asked the Bishop of Geneva what one must do to attain perfection. You must love God with all your heart, he answered, and your neighbour as yourself. I did not ask wherein perfection lies, I rejoined, but how to attain it. Charity, he said again, that is both the means and the end, the only way by which we can reach that perfection which is, after all, but charity itself. Just as the soul is the life of the body, so charity is the life of the soul. I know all that, I said, but I want to know how one is to love God with all one's heart and one's neighbour as oneself. But again, he answered, we must love God with all our hearts and our neighbours as ourselves. I am no further than I was, I replied. Tell me how to acquire such love. The best way, the shortest and easiest way of loving God with all one's heart is to love him wholly and heartily. He would give no other answer. At last, however, the bishop said, there are many besides you who want me to tell them of methods and systems and secret ways of becoming perfect, and I can only tell them that the sole secret is a hearty love of God, and the only way of attaining that love is by loving. You learn to speak by speaking, to study by studying, to run by running, to work by working, and just so you learn to love God and man by loving. All those who think to learn in any other way deceive themselves. If you want to love God, go on loving him more and more. begin as a mere apprentice, and the very power of love will lead you on to become a master in the art. Those who have made most progress will continually press on, never believing themselves to have reached their end, for charity should go on increasing until we draw our last breath. That's very nice, isn't it? How to learn to love by loving, by practicing loving is lovely, that quote. I love that. You learn to speak by speaking, to study by studying, to run by running, to work by working. And just so you learn to love God and man by loving. And I think that's something we could all practice and try more of in our daily lives, right? Loving kindness, as the Buddhists would say, metta, patience, charity. All of these things the world needs more of. Back to Huxley. The passage from what St. Bernard calls the carnal love of the sacred humanity to the spiritual love of the Godhead, from the emotional love that can only unite lover and beloved in act to the perfect charity which unifies them in spiritual substance, is reflected in religious practice as the passage from meditation, discursive and affective, to infused contemplation. All Christian writers insist that the spiritual love of Godhead is superior to the carnal love of the humanity, which serves as introduction and means to man's final end in unitive love knowledge of the divine ground. But all insist no less strongly that carnal love is a necessary introduction and an indispensable means. Oriental writers would agree that this is true for many persons, but not for all, since there are some born contemplatives who are able to harmonize their starting point with their goal, and to embark directly upon the yoga of knowledge. It is from the point of view of the born contemplative that the greatest of Taoist philosophers writes in the following passage. And this is a quote from Chuang-Tzu. Quote, "These men who in a special way regard heaven as Father and have, as it were, a personal love for it, how much more should they love what is above heaven as Father? Other men in a special way regard their rulers as better than themselves, and they, as it were, personally die for them. How much more should they die for what is truer than a ruler? When the springs dry up, the fish are altogether on dry land. They then moisten each other with their dampness and keep each other wet with their slime. But this is not to be compared with forgetting each other in a river or lake." End quote from Chuang-Tzu. Back to Huxley. The slime of personal and emotional love is remotely similar to the water of the Godhead's spiritual being, but of inferior quality and, precisely because the love is emotional and therefore personal, of insufficient quantity. Having, by their voluntary ignorance, wrongdoing and wrong-being, caused the divine springs to dry up, human beings can do something to mitigate the horrors of their situation by keeping one another wet with their slime. But there can be no happiness or safety in time, and no deliverance into eternity, until they give up thinking that slime is enough, and, by abandoning themselves to what is in fact their element, call back the eternal waters. To those who seek first the kingdom of God, all the rest will be added. From those who, like the modern idolaters of progress, seek first all the rest, in the exception that, after the harnessing of atomic power and the next revolution but 3, the kingdom of God will be added, everything will be taken away. And yet we continue to trust in progress, to regard personal slime as the highest form of spiritual moisture, and to prefer an agonizing and impossible existence on dry land to love, joy and peace in our native ocean. Back to some more quotes. Quote, "The sect of lovers is distinct from all others. Lovers have a religion and a faith all their own." And that's from Jalaluddin Rumi. Another quote, "The soul lives by that which it loves rather than in the body which it animates, for it has not its life in the body, but rather gives it to the body and lives in that which it loves." And that's from St. John of the Cross. And that's very Neoplatonic, that one, because Plotinus, I think, says that, for it has not its life in the body, but rather gives it to the body. So Plotinus would say that the soul gives life to the body and creates the couplement, he calls it. And then when one dies, the soul's left the body and the body is unanimated, it's not alive anymore. I think that's definitely what Huxley's getting at. Google on this, in this chapter, Love is All There Is. He's making a strong point that we should be loving more, shouldn't he? And the final quote here from St. Augustine. Temperance is love, surrendering itself wholly to him who is its object. Courage is love, bearing all things gladly for the sake of him who is its object. Justice is love, serving only him who is its object, and therefore rightly ruling. Prudence is love, making wise distinctions between what hinders and what helps itself. End quote. Back to Huxley. The distinguishing marks of charity are disinterestedness, tranquility, and humility. But where there is disinterestedness, there is neither greed for personal advantage nor fear for personal loss or punishment. Where there is tranquility, there is neither craving nor aversion, but a steady will to conform to the divine Tao or Logos on every level of existence, and a steady awareness of the divine suchness and what should be one's own relations to it. And where there is humility, there is no censoriousness and no glorification of the ego or any projected alter ego at the expense of others who are recognized as having the same weaknesses and faults, but also the same capacity for transcending them in the unitive knowledge of God as one has oneself. From all this it follows that charity is the root and substance of morality, and that where there is little charity there will be much avoidable evil. All this has been summed up in Augustine's formula, love and do what you like. That's a good one. That's just the same as good as Stuart Pearce's, isn't it? Love and do what you like. Among the later elaborations of the Augustinian theme, we may cite the following from the writings of John Edward, one of those spiritually minded 17th century divines whose teaching fell on the deaf ears of warning factions, and when the revolution and the military dictatorship were at an end, on the even deafer ears of Restoration clergymen and their successors in the Augustan age. Just how deaf those ears could be we may judge by what Swift wrote of his beloved and morally perfect perfect, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that. There's no vowels in the second half of the word. I give up on that one. The subject matter of their conversations, as of their poetry, consisted of such things as friendship and benevolence, the visible operations of nature or ancient traditions, the bounds and limits of virtue, the unerring rules of reason. Never once do the ideas of God or charity or deliverance engage their minds, which shows sufficiently clearly what the Dean of St. Patrick's thought of the religion by which he made his money. Quote, turn the man loose who has found the living guide within him, and then let him neglect the outward if he can. Just as you would say to a man who loves his wife with all tenderness, you are at liberty to beat her, hurt her or kill her if you want to. That's a bit strong, isn't it? From John Everard. I like it. Google. Sounds like you're... have you read the Perennial Philosophy before Google? Are you just going through it a second time? Huxley says, from this it follows that where there is charity, there can be no coercion. Another quote, God forces no one, for love cannot compel, and God's service, therefore, is a thing of perfect freedom. And that one's from Hans Denk. Back to Huxley briefly. But just because it cannot compel, charity has a kind of authority, a non-coercive power by means of which it defends itself and gets its beneficent will done in the world, not always, of course, not inevitably or automatically, for individuals and still more organizations can be impenetrably armored against divine influence, but in a surprisingly large number of cases. Quote, Heaven arms with pity those whom it would not see destroyed. And that's from Lao Tzu. And this quote is from the Dhammapada. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. In those who harbour such thoughts, hatred will never cease. He abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. In those who do not harbour such thoughts, hatred will cease. For hatred does not cease by hatred at any time. This is an old rule. Back to Huxley. Our present economic, social and international arrangements are based in large measure upon organised lovelessness. We begin by lacking charity towards nature, so that instead of trying to cooperate with Tao or the Logos on the inanimate and subhuman levels, we try to dominate and exploit. We waste the earth's mineral resources, ruin its soil, ravage its forests, pour filth into its rivers and poisonous fumes into its air. From lovelessness in relation to nature, we advance to lovelessness in relation to art, a lovelessness so extreme that we have effectively killed all the fundamental or useful arts and set up various kinds of mass production by machines in their place. And so this is very interesting that Huxley's saying this in 1945. So if that's how Huxley felt about, you know, the world and civilization in 1945, you know, how much worse is it today? Ask yourself. And we just got a couple of pages left of yeah, I bet it rocked your world at 16. Google. So we're going to we're nearly finished now. A couple of pages left. So any questions or comments? Thanks for your input today, Google. I've appreciated it very much. And so yeah, let's this is all Huxley now for the end. And of course, this lovelessness in regard to art is at the same time a lovelessness in regard to the human beings who have to perform the foolproof and grace-proof tasks imposed by our mechanical art surrogates and by the interminable paperwork connected with mass production and mass distribution. With mass production and mass distribution go mass financing, and the three have conspired to expropriate ever-increasing numbers of small owners of land and productive equipment, thus reducing the sum of freedom among the majority and increasing the power of a minority to exercise a coercive control over the lives of their fellows. Wowzers, that's some capitalist quote there. If you ever watch Russell Brand's YouTube channel, listen to this Huxley sort of summing up capitalism. I'm not anti-capitalist, but this is sort of sums it up very nicely. I'm just going to repeat that last bit. With mass production and mass distribution go mass financing, and the three have conspired to expropriate ever-increasing numbers of small owners of land and productive equipment, thus reducing the sum of freedom among the majority and increasing the power of a minority to exercise a coercive control over the lives of their fellows. And ask yourself what's been going on over the last couple of years, you know? Reflect on that quote and think what's been going on. This coercively controlling minority is composed of private capitalists or government bureaucrats or of both classes of bosses acting in collaboration, and of course the coercive and therefore essentially loveless nature of the control remains the same, whether the bosses call themselves company directors or civil servants. The only difference between these two kinds of oligarchical ruler is that the first derive more of their power from wealth than from position within a conventionally respected hierarchy, while the second derive more power from position than from wealth. Upon this fairly uniform groundwork of loveless relationships are imposed others, which vary wildly from one society to another, according to local conditions and local habits of thoughts and feelings. Here are a few examples. Contempt and exploitation of coloured minorities living among white majorities, or of coloured majorities governed by minorities of white imperialists, hatred of Jews, Catholics, Freemasons, or any other minority whose language, habits, appearance, or religion happens to differ from those of the local majority. And the crowning superstructure of uncharity is the organized lovelessness of the relations between state and sovereign state, a lovelessness that expresses itself in the axiomatic assumption that it is right and natural for national organizations to behave like thieves and murderers, armed to the teeth and ready, at the first favorable opportunity, to steal and kill. Just how axiomatic is this assumption about the nature of nationhood is shown by the history of Central America. So long as the arbitrarily delimited territories of Central America were called provinces of the Spanish colonial empire, there was peace between their inhabitants. But early in the 19th century, the various administrative districts of the Spanish Empire broke from their allegiance to the mother country and decided to become nations on the European model. Result: they immediately went to war with one another. Why? Because, by definition, a sovereign national state is an organization that has the right and duty to coerce its members to steal and kill on the largest possible scale. Lead us not into temptation must be the guiding principle of all social organization, and the temptations to be guarded against and, so far as possible, eliminated by means of appropriate economic and political arrangements are temptations against charity, that is to say, against the disinterested love of God, nature and man. First, the dissemination and general acceptance of any form of the perennial philosophy will do something to preserve men and women from the temptation to idolatrous worship of things in time, church worship, state worship, revolutionary future worship, humanistic self-worship, all of them essentially and necessarily opposed to charity. Next come decentralization, widespread private ownership of land and the means of production on a small scale, discouragement of monopoly by state or corporation, division of economic and political power, the only guarantee, as Lord Acton was never tired of insisting, of civil liberty under law. These social rearrangements would do much to prevent ambitious individuals, organizations, and governments from being led into the temptation of behaving tyrannously, while cooperatives, democratically controlled professional organizations, and town meetings would deliver the masses of the people from the temptation of making their decentralized individualism too rugged. But of course, none of these intrinsically desirable reforms can possibly be carried out, so long as it is thought right and natural that sovereign states should prepare to make war on one another. For modern war cannot be waged except by countries with an overdeveloped capital goods industry, countries in which economic power is wielded either by the state or by a few monopolistic corporations, which it is easy to tax and, if necessary, temporarily to nationalize. Countries where the labouring masses, being without property, are rootless, easily transferable from one place to another, highly regimented by factory discipline, and decentralized. Any decentralized society of free, uncoerced small owners with a properly balanced economy must, in a war-making world such as ours, be at the mercy of one whose production is highly mechanized and centralized, whose people are without property and therefore easily coercible, and whose economy is lopsided. This is why the one desire of industrial undeveloped countries like Mexico and China is to become like Germany or England or the United States. So long as the organized lovelessness of war and preparation for war remains, there can be no mitigation on any large nationwide or worldwide scale of the organized lovelessness of our economic and political relationships. War and preparation for war are standing temptations to make the present bad, God-eclipsing arrangements of society progressively worse as technology becomes progressively more efficient. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 5, and chapter 6 is mortification, non-attachment, and right livelihood. And that bit there is very almost chilling for me. I'll read the bit that I'm talking about. And this is quite a long chapter as well. So we're getting through the book, guys. We're working our way through it. Chapter 6, mortification, non-attachment, and right livelihood, will be coming tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening at 9 o'clock, the same time. But yeah, let me just talk quickly here. Google says, it was unquestionably a life-altering experience, but a decade back. A lot has changed in this beautiful home of ours since, obviously, although I do agree entirely. You're very welcome, Google. Let me just read this little bit here, because I've been reading, I've done a video about it, so you can go and just check that out, about Ray Dalio's book on the changing world order. And so here, this is 1945, yeah, and it says, this is why the one desire of industrial undeveloped countries like Mexico and China is to become like Germany or England or the United States. And so what Ray Dalio is saying in his book is that it has occurred. China has become industrially developed now. And yeah, I'm not going to go into all the details of what Ray Dalio's talking about, but yeah, it's very fascinating, the big cycle, what Ray Dalio says, over like 100 years, and that the United States is on the decline and China's on the rise. And yeah, I haven't finished the book yet, so I can't tell you Dalio's prediction for the future, but yeah, it's very interesting. And yes, sorry, Google, I'd love to read another chapter, but like I say, I think it's good to yeah, just one chapter at a time, work our way slowly through it, because it's quite overwhelming. It's just pure information going in, isn't it? There's no stories, and it's very interesting, right? The difference between a profound non-fiction book like the Perennial Philosophy and, let's say, an Enid Blyton Magic Faraway Tree, where it's just a story. You know, Enid Blyton takes you on like a lovely journey, a nice, almost like a fairground ride. You jump in and you're just taken. Your imagination paints a lot of the pictures of the characters and the tree and the lands. Whereas Huxley is very, what's the word, sort of, yeah, metaphysical. There's nothing practical really. It's all ideas. So yeah, no wonder the mind gets tired while reading. But guys, I hope you'll join me tomorrow night at 9 for chapter 6, mortification, non-attachment, and right livelihood. And before you go, actually, I just want to share something with you that I'm very excited about. I don't know if I can't help myself, I have to share it. I want to announce it later on, but because you guys are here, I want to share it. I don't know if any of you guys have seen my other channel, Lewis Kirk, where I do the audio ebooks, where I do the I read the book, but then there's also the text. I figured out just yesterday evening, I was having a creative spell and was thinking, and this morning I've worked it out. So this is just a rough draft of what it will look like. But I'm going to do, I've done all of Plato's dialogues, but Plato's Republic is very long. And I want to do Plato's Republic and then also work through the biblical stories and look what it will look like. The live audio ebook. Tell me what you think. And this is just, like I say, a rough draft. So this is what it will look like. The live audio ebooks. This is the Great Switcheroo, which will be another Roald Dahl coming to Lewis Kirk. But if you could imagine a platonic dialogue and me reading it, and then so it's a live audio ebook. So what do you think about that, guys? Google. It's not, the book is not an investment book really. It's sort of the changing world order, why nations rise and fail. But I'll definitely be interested in doing a sort of a series on the book, on the ideas in it, because it's very interesting and it would help me to understand it more. So yeah, if you guys are interested in that, let me know. And also let me know what you think about the live audio ebooks coming. But for now, guys, thanks all for being here so much. I really enjoyed the back and forth, especially Google, you're on fire this evening. Thanks for being here. And I'll see you tomorrow night at 9. All right, guys, take care. Hey, you guys are welcome. Welcome, Leanne. Excuse me, Leanne and Bruce. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to read the Republic and the biblical stories. So excellent. I'm glad you guys are interested as well. So guys, take care. Have a great week, and I hope to see you tomorrow. All right, guys. See you soon. Bye now.